So, time to review the cards again. Going to go from bottom to top, like we did last time, and just go one by one. First one being Armadillo. Yeah. Taunt, 6 mana, 4/7 legendary. At the end of your turn, give all taunt minions in your hand +2/+2. It's a beast. The beast is relevant, at least in the cases of like Undasta for warrior. Sometimes they run that. But outside of that, I don't think that's going to be particularly a big deal. But the effect and the minion itself are really good. You would think that somewhere around a 4/8 taunt is even good at around like 8 mana when you think of like Primordial Drake. So this minion being 1 health less for 2 mana less is fantastic, even with the loss of like the AoE effect. But as a replacement, you get this crazy buff effect. I don't know. There's not a huge amount of taunt minions that Warrior will actually run. I feel like if this card is good enough, and it might be to fit into Control Warrior, then it will try and include more taunt minions. It's just whether the taunt minions are better than like the bomb package or the anti-aggro packages that we have now. But the card itself is really good. So if there's a good world for it, it will see play. We got all of the legendary champions coming in, and they all have essentially the Highlander effect of you need to have no duplicates inside your deck for something to work. In the case of Reno, it is the Mage legendary, and if your deck has no duplicates, deal 10 damage randomly split across all enemy minions. In my thinking, I was like, all right, what's the cost of playing this card? In aggro, it would probably be too high to do it, so you have to do control with this. There has to be enough card diversity for this to be worth it without losing much for this to actually be a good include in Mage. But the problem right now, I think, is consistency in Mage is so important with stuff like Conjurer's Calling being around and the high power level that it's at, that I don't think you would run this card. You would have to run it in a specifically new kind of mage that doesn't particularly mind the inconsistency for the sake of some late game tools having to be split around a bit. There might be a mage like that, but I think it won't be like a tier 1 deck or anything because Conjurer's Calling is just so freaking good. But the other side of this is because Bomb Warrior exists, it becomes incredibly hard to play this and not get ruined later by just having 2 bombs in your deck or something. So that in a control mirror seems kind of lacking, which makes me further believe that Mage won't be able to play this because the Conjurer's Calling package is just better against Warrior and most late game decks overall, while also still being good against aggro if you use certain builds. So I think this card won't really see play in the current meta. Maybe in like a much later meta it might see some experimentation, but it's tough. It's going to need a lot more support than just one card that has a no duplicates tab with only this slight payoff. We have the Hunter version, which is if your deck has no duplicates, summon King Crush. I tried to make an aggro deck that had no duplicates in it, and it's not too hard to pull off. So if you can manage to, if you can manage to play Face Hunter or Mid-Range Hunter with this and play it on curve, it's insane. I think that's probably the best circumstance in which you could play it, and I feel like the consistency loss may not be too bad. It's just going to have to be able to hold up to the other kinds of aggro decks that are around at the time, whatever those are, for it to actually see play. But 7 mana King Crush is not bad, so might see play. But I'm not like super confident. The Bomb Warrior argument doesn't really hold as much water because the Warrior's going to be focusing very hard on not dying, that it will not typically have the same amount of time to play the bombs if you are trying to just slam this down on turn 7. So I'm thinking not as big of a deal, but still a contention to ruin the deck if Bomb Warrior is just back in the meta again, which it might be. We have Elise the Enlightened. Battlecry, if your deck has no duplicates, duplicate your hand. This one has a lot of promise as far as combo goes. You'd think of something along the lines of Malagos Double Moonfire being copied. If you draw out the first Moonfire, then you don't have any problems with deck duplicates anymore. So you can just double what you got and then go to town. The main problem, of course, is still Bomb Warrior, and I think Bomb Warrior against this deck would definitely be a huge detriment because combo decks typically have to draw most, if not all, of their deck to function, and if you got a bunch of bombs in there, you're probably going to die. So that might be tough for a while, but in the future, this card might see a bit more experimentation once cards like Bombs and like Hakara's Blood get out of the rotation. So I think this card could be dangerous later on, just maybe not right now. Any kind of duplication effect is very strong, whatever's been printed. So you definitely have to watch out for it. We have Sir Finley of the Sands. If your deck has no duplicates, discover upgraded hero power. I would liken this in the same way as I would with Keleseth in some ways, in that if you draw it and you play it on curve, it's obviously game winning. But I don't feel like an aggro deck in Paladin is nearly as consistent as the ones in Hunter right now. So it might suffer because of the, I mainly think of like the loss of Divine Favor and only being able to run Christology as some of the draw. There's the other draw 1 health guys in your deck thing. And there's also the tutor lowest attack card, which is a possibility for this to be played out. But the other caveat for this is you don't get the same hero power every time. So you end up not necessarily getting the high tempo stuff. You might end up getting like armor up, heal, and life tap, and then you're forced to play the long game. So I think this is better suited for some kind of mid-range paladin, maybe even some kind of control paladin, but I think like combo paladin's still better at that. So I think, no, almost certainly mid-range. And it's going to have a lot of good statted minions for it to work. There are some ways in which that can be pulled off. I just don't know if it's going to really hold up once you remove the consistency of the deck. I feel like it might be too difficult to make a consistent mid-range deck with this, but we'll have to see. Maybe someone will figure something out. Regardless of the fact, I would say out of all of these, the order of competence is probably somewhere around the lines of Elise to Finley to Bran to Reno. So it's not a bad card, but all of these cards have the same weakness, and all of these cards make your deck consistency suffer by quite a bit. So there is a large cost to playing them, and they will probably need more support before they can actually gain traction over a doubles deck with 2 of cards instead of Highlighter with only 1 of. We have Expired Merchant. Discard the highest cost card from your hand, and then when it dies, it adds 2 copies of that card to your hand. This card's really good. This card is super, super good, because if you think of it in the context of something like Handlock, if you play this, you discard your giant, then it dies, you get 2 giants, which means you don't lose the hand space of playing this card. It's essentially a refill, and you end up getting a second threat on top of that. So in Handlock, this card is insane. Even in Zoo, this card's insane because you end up playing the card and you discard the thing that you're probably not going to play next turn. And in exchange, you get 2 copies of it later. If Doomguard was in rotation, this card would be not super busted because you would still discard the Doomguard. What would be like? I guess Leroy. Leroy is the most powerful discard that a Zoo deck could have because you just net 6 damage from nothing. So definitely a dangerous card, something to watch out for. I think it could bolster the power level of Warlock pretty high if it gets into the right kind of deck. We have Making Mummies, the quest for Paladin, and it is to play 5 Reborn minions. The reward is Emperor Wraps. Because it's only Reborn, it's kind of hard to say how hard or easy that will be, but I will assume it will not be too hard, given this is the Reborn expansion. And the reward of Emperor Wraps is to use 2 mana to then make a copy of a minion that you have, which is an incredibly powerful effect. You have to have minions to play in order for that to actually work. There are a lot of really strong minions, like say Karen as the example, where if you were to copy them for 2 mana, the tempo gain would be super insane. So I'm thinking that this card has a lot of promise, and with the right kind of deck, it could make a very dangerous mid-range Paladin build. So maybe even dangerous control build, honestly. It's a very strong hero power. Probably one of the strongest hero powers we've had. It just takes the proper kind of deck for it to work. But very, very good. And here's our Reborn example directly after. Mermy, Reborn 1/1 Murloc. It's solid. It's basically Mekaru, Possessed Villager, Northshire Cleric, that all solid 1-drops. And you can just play it in any deck that requires a 1-drop and be relatively happy about it. You'll be especially happy if that deck happens to be Murloc, but if it's not, then it's not that bad. I think this card's fantastic. I've played 1/1, have to kill another time in so many of my decks and had great success. Having another one just ups the consistency of the 1-mana curve, which means that it will make aggro and zoo decks much better, because now we're at the point where we have 3, if not 4, different cards that you can play in that slot and have it be very difficult to kill. So very, very promising for that archetype. We have Hidden Oasis. Summon a 6/6 Ancient with Taunt or restore 12 health. It's kind of weak on its own, but with the Druid quest, I can definitely see it working. Being able to heal 12 and restore, or heal 12 and then play 6/6 at the same time is essentially about the same as like a Reno effect. And being able to have Taunt on top of that makes it incredibly strong. It's just you also need to play the quest at the same time. I think we still need to see a couple more choose one effects that have incredibly powerful choices, like higher mana stuff. But once we start seeing more of these, it will make that quest a lot better. This is a good start. We have Scarlet Webweaver, which is a 6-mana beast for Hunter. Reduce the cost of a random beast in your hand by 5. This card's completely insane because it is essentially a 1-mana 5/5. If you play it on 6, you reduce the card to next turn to be 5 mana less. But if you play it on 7 and you play this card and then you play the card with it and then you play another card with it, so it spirals out of control pretty hard. I think of like Tundra Rhino in this, where you would play Scarlet Webweaver, discount Tundra, and then play Tundra, and then play a second Scarlet Webweaver to then play Highmane, and then like suddenly you're having, what is that? 16. It's 18 burst damage. At what turn would that be? If you just play those 4 cards. Webweaver, Highmane, and that. You'd have to play the first Webweaver and have it survive. And then the second Webweaver would end up being 1 mana or something else to that degree. You play it and you discount the other thing. So it would be on turn 7, yeah. Because you would discount one of the other Highmane or Tundra by 5 mana. And then you pay a total of 7 mana. Yeah. So it's just really good. 18 burst damage turn 7 is ridiculous. And it has more applications past that. There's plenty of combo things that you can do with this card. I think it's fantastic, and I'm definitely going to play around with it. All right, and Hunter gets another insane beast, because why not? But it's also at 6 mana. That's the catch-22 with Hunter. It's like all your beasts at high mana are insane, but they're always 6 mana, so you have to pick one. This one in particular is essentially the Big Dirty Rat, where you summon a friendly minion from your opponent's hand, and then you attack that minion. This is more helpful in a case where combo is good, but it's still pretty helpful in cases where control is good, or when you just need to have a lot of stats at once. if you put this in the terms of high main, it is better than high main if they have nothing in hand and they have to use, and they don't have like hard removal or anything like that, because that would be more stats up front. But it's worse than high main if you end up killing something, because then it's just like a damaged minion of some kind, which is easier to remove. Granted that 9 health is very, very hard to remove entirely, but even so, the card advantage is not necessarily something of a concern for Hunter in all archetypes. That being said, there are some control Hunter builds out there, being the Uldum builds that you can play these days with the duplicated Lifesteal Rush guys, the Scale Hides. So I could see playing a Wild Bloodstinger in those kinds of decks, but I don't know if you'd like play more than one, or if you'd just play one of them or none of them. I think it would be very dependent on the meta, but the card itself is still solid, so very, very good tool for Hunter to use. We have Bizarre Mugger. Rush, battlecry at a random minion from another class to your opponent, to your hand, rather, not your opponent's hand. That'd be very silly. This card's okay. It's like, it's not as good as a deal as something like Blink Fox or the 4/3 steal is, because its stats are not as aggressive. You would think that this card would be something along the lines of some like 4 mana, but instead it's 5. So it feels bad to play it, even with the rush, just because it really doesn't add much to the board. But it's okay. I don't think you'd feel too bad about playing this in your Thief Rogue deck. I just feel like you'd rather play something a little bit more defensive later on so you don't die. Something like Ziliax or some kind of Rotten to My Core kind of action, rather than play this. It is defensive, but it won't guarantee that your face doesn't get hit. So there might be better options, but it's not too bad. It's definitely going to be nice in Arena. We have the meme card of the set, Desert Obelisk. If you control 3 of these at the end of your turn, deal 5 damage to a random enemy, 5 mana, 0/5. So there are a lot of problems with this card. The first problem is you can't have more than 3. You have to only have 3, and nothing less, nothing more, at least based off of these texts. So if you only cap out at 15 damage and it's up to random targets, you're much better off of just hitting something else. I could be wrong about that, though. It feels like Blizzard have definitely put up ambiguous texts before. If it ends up being that you could have more than 3 of these, then I think it's a bit better, but still pretty memey. There's so many more consistent ways of killing your opponent in their board than getting multiple obelisks that require very little setup, that I think by the time that you would get something like this out, you're going to be facing like a board full of 10 drops or something from Mage or something to that degree. It's interesting that can be played in any class. I don't know which class is the most capable of duplicating this card to a hilarious degree, but if there is one and it gets to use it and it becomes the #1 meta deck, I guess we'll all be wrong. But I'm thinking probably not going to see play ever. Maybe in Wild. Maybe in Wild Rogue will make something with this and make something funny, but not in Standard. We have Rift Cleaver, a 6 mana 7/5 demon. Destroy a minion. Your hero takes damage equal to its health. The awkward thing, this can also target your minions, and you have to do it. So if you're ahead on board, you cannot play this card, or else you kill your own minion and then take damage equal to that minion's stats. So it is strictly a comeback card for the most part. You can be at like a marginal game and still play this, but if you're like way ahead, you can't play this at all. So I would say this card's okay in Zoo. I don't think it would mind playing something like this to kill some crazy huge taunt minion, especially since that's like a very big demand for Zoo right now. To be able to kill a large taunt minion with 8 health specifically is something that Zoo very much needs to be able to do a lot of the time. And this makes a more consistent way to be able to do that without having to really dampen down your deck all that much by running some stupid piece of hard removal like Siphon Soul. So I think in that vein, it is definitely really helpful for Zoo to get this. I just don't know whether it can afford to run too much of a card like this. It's really in the same vein of like running like Rafam, in that yes, you can tech against a control deck to beat it, or you could just kill them. So there's some kind of mitigation to be had, some kind of deck balancing act to do whenever you add a card like this to your deck. There have definitely been times where Zoo has done this. There's been times back in like Patron meta where Zoo would even run something like Shadow Flame to get through an enemy board because patrons were annoying or Zoo was annoying in general. So there are times where this could happen. So I don't think it's unwarranted, but I don't think this will ever be something that Control really wants to run, because I think Siphon is more along the lines of their game plan rather than running something like Rift Cleaver, which is a threat, but in a deck that does not necessarily need threats to win. So we'll have to see. I guess to be more accurate with that, they don't need their removal to be threats. They need efficient cards that don't cost too much, I guess. Something like this is a huge health cost, and that's not something that Warlock really has a lot of room to work around with right now. I think maybe in a world where Warlock had more healing, this would be more attractive in Control. But at the moment, Warlock does not have a great amount of healing. So maybe in another expansion, this might see use in Handlock, but I don't think right now. However, speaking of good Zoo cards, Evil Recruiter, destroy a friendly lackey to summon a 5/5 demon. So if you thought Blessing of Kings was good, now you can play it at 3 mana. Seems pretty busted. And it comes with a 3/3. Oh my god. This card's really, really good. The only problem is lackeys are not incredibly easy for Warlock to get. At the moment, you only have Cable Rat and the You Served Your Purpose card. You Served Your Purpose only works if you destroy a minion, and then you would then have to play the lackey on turn 3, so you really only realistically get this on turn 4. In the same scenario with Cable Rat, you could play Cable Rat on 2, but then you have to play the lackey, and then this. So it's still about 4 mana is where this will come out at the earliest. And a 4 mana 8/8 is obviously insane. I think what will determine whether or not this ends up really being good is whether or not that Warlock gets another Lackey Enabler card. Not something that is going to need a Lackey to activate, rather than something that gives Lackeys, or something that gives Lackeys that's released that's neutral would be helpful for Luck to use. We'll have to see. At the very least, this card has a lot of potential, and it could do great things, but it's going to really depend on the support that it gets. It might just be that this is an insane card, but it just never works. So we'll have to see the rest of the set to really evaluate something like this. We have Hunter's Pack. This is a kind of a card that's been theorized about in the custom cards in Hearthstone and Hearthstone in general. Now released as an actual card. Add a random hunter, beast, secret, and weapon to your hand. Note that the weapon is also a hunter card. It's the hunter transitive property is on there. You do not get a mage secret and a warrior weapon from this. All of these things are hunter cards. So if you think in the realm of, all right, hunter secrets, that's the value I think is pretty much certain to be average most of the time. Weapon is almost always going to be above average, considering that we've gotten rid of Candle Shot. The only weapons that I can think of that weapon even has right now, that Hunter even has right now, are Gladiator's Longbow, the Eagle Horn Bow, and the Axe. Those are the only 3 I can think of that Hunter has right now. There might be another that I'm forgetting, but that regardless of that fact, there's still a lot of consistency to be had and a lot of good value to be had from that kind of a card. But on top of that, you also get a random hunter beast. The random hunter beast has a lot of variance to it, because hunter beasts are varying in cost from 1 to like, I don't know, 9 mana for Crush. So you might get something really, really good, but you might not be able to play it right away. I think the reason this card works is because of the weapon almost always being a consistently good card that you would like to have in your hand. And then on top of having a weapon in your deck, you also get the other 2 cards in your hand as well. Where this kind of falls flat is that the tempo of the weapon is not something that you can easily get if it ends up being like you add a weapon to your hand and it's Gladiator's Longbow, then you have to wait until turn 7 to actually utilize that kind of effect. And then in the case of that, you just spent your turn 3 passing as Hunter, which is not typically a good thing, but sometimes something that Hunter can afford to do. I think of this also in the vein of like Master's Call, where Master's Call is a fantastic card that ends up getting a lot of value and immediate tempo, because your beasts typically have synergy with one another and they can fight back on board a lot of the time, whereas this is a little bit more variance. But the card is good. So because it's less built around than something like Master's Call is, it might see some play in some decks that want to run like Houndmaster in it. But in other cases, I'm not sure we'd really want to cut this in like Beast Hunter for Master's Call, because Master's Call is much more consistent of a card. So I think there's a future for this card. It's just going to be in a very specific kind of hybrid hunter as far as like the types of minions deck, instead of specifically aiming at beasts. It also has to fight for Master's Call as to whether or not that is the more consistent option. Because if you would just run Master's Call instead of this, then you would just run Master's Call instead of this, if that makes any sense. If the card is just better, then why restrict your deck? But if a card like Master's Call is just better, you would run Master's Call instead of this. So all that goes to say is the card is good, might see play. We'll have to see what kind of deck of Hunter is the best deck. We have Bloodsworn Mercenary. Choose the damage friendly minion, summon a copy of it. So it's like Prince back from way back when, except the deck restriction isn't there. You could say this is effectively a 3 mana if you run Inner Rage. I don't know if there's anything in particular you would necessarily need to copy. The one I can think of is like you play Leroy, you Inner Rage your Leroy, you copy your Leroy, and then you deal 16 damage to your opponent. That's like the obvious one where you would include Inner Rage in the deck, and it's a 3 mana 3/3, so that could work. Other cases, of course, would be like if you somehow got the dream and you have the coin late game, you play Grommash, you damage Grommash with Inner Rage, you coin this out, you copy the Grommash, and your opponent takes 24 damage to their face. That's also pretty good. It also just works in general minion combat. So I feel like where this card shines the most is probably in an aggro to a mid-range deck. Something like Dragon Warrior back in the day, where you would just play on curve, high-statted, high-power minions, and then beat your opponent up. I think that's where this card is best, but maybe people will find a way to abuse this in control as well. We'll see. Tip the Scales. 8 mana Paladin card, summon 7 Murlocs from your deck. So the awkward thing about this card right now is that Murloc support for Paladin is actually quite low right now. The only card that really works with this that is specifically from Paladin is exactly Finley, which completely does not work in the case of this card because it's very hard to run 7 unique Murlocs from your deck and not run out eventually. So I'm thinking this is something that you would run in a just general Murloc deck. Think of it in terms of like the Treants from Druid, except it also draws you 7 cards. If you were to play this in a control deck or a combo deck, I think it would honestly be better because of the card draw. I think combo probably more so just because the deck thinning is so strong with this card. I don't think you would ever really want to run 2 of this, but you might if you wanted to thin your deck really consistently. And something like Shrivala, Holy Wrath, combo Paladin could definitely use a card like this. The only sacrifice is you can't really use Novices in this way, but it does make your combo deck also an aggressive deck, which is kind of fun and very annoying if it were to actually work. So there might be hope for this card in combo Paladin. If you make a combo Holy Wrath Murloc hybrid thing, it could work, but we'll have to see. Speaking of Murlocs, we have Fishflinger. 2 mana, 3/2 Murloc. Battlecry, add a random Murloc to each player's hand. So this card is better for aggro than it is for anything else. You play this card, you get fuel all the time, and your opponent just gets a Murloc, which doesn't necessarily have synergy with their deck, but your Murloc is more often than not going to have synergy with yours. The only problem with this, I feel, is that the card has no real meaningful text, so that when you play it, you may not get anything valuable, and then you're just stuck with a 2 mana 3/2 and maybe a bit more stats. But the high roll of something like this would be to get like the Shaman 2/3, and then you get more Murlocs and more Murlocs. So it definitely has potential, and I think in Murloc Shaman in particular, it probably has the most potential because you can just run that card to begin with, and then you get 2 extra Murlocs off of this Murloc, which is a lot of steam. So there's some ways where this can be good. Even if you don't run this, you could still get it off of the random effect from Shaman, which would then give you more steam. So the fact that this even exists changed the dynamic of Murloc for Murloc Shaman drastically. And finally, we have the rogue legendary Anka the Buried. Battlecry, change each Death Rattle minion in your hand to a 1/1 that costs 1, 5 mana, 5/5. So the most powerful application of this card is probably to use this in conjunction with Flying Carpet, and then to buff all of the 1/1s into 2/1s with Rush to have crazy Death Rattle effects. That's like the really good scenario. The only issue with that could be that the Death Rattles in Rogue are too clunky in order to actually make a consistent deck while also including Carpet. That's not to say that there's not a lot of good 1-drops, so I think it's not going to be too hard. It's just that it may be hard to justify running the Anka buried package over something like the Pirate package, and then we just don't fight fair and we do it that way. But it's still a very powerful card, so I think it could definitely see play. Lots of good cards that have been released these past couple of days, and there's a lot of promising stuff in here.